Wayne, thanks for being on the podcast.
Glad to be here.
This is quite a privilege, quite an honor. I was really looking forward to this episode.
Well, we'll see where it goes, won't we?
Well, you came highly recommended. So lots of different places we could jump in. I think I just want to jump in at your time at McDonald's, if that's okay.
Sure.
So I know you spent a lot of time at McDonald's, so let's dive into that. But I was curious, can you tell us about, at the peak of your career at McDonald's, what was your role and what did your average day look like, if there was such a thing?
I don't know if I can answer average day. So I was a corporate officer at McDonald's, and there were a number of areas that I was responsible for. A couple of the more prominent ones would be things people would know: the supply chain area of McDonald's, which would include quality assurance and purchasing and logistics, the equipment engineering piece for McDonald's, the store systems part of McDonald's. I was also an officer over the corporate strategy area for McDonald's. So at that time, I've been out of McDonald's for 15 years. At that time, McDonald's was, through acquisition, collecting a number of smaller restaurant companies with the idea of expanding them. So ones that would have been most prominent, and probably the most familiar one to folks, is Chipotle Mexican Grill. So I was on the board of that company when it had 17 restaurants.
No way.
Yeah.
So are you saying that McDonald's acquired Chipotle?
Yeah, McDonald's owned the majority of the company. Steve Ells, who's the founder, and his family had opened, I don't remember if it was 15 or 16 restaurants in the Denver, Colorado, and Colorado Springs area. And they were really looking for a partner to help them turn it into a brand and grow it, which infrastructure is what McDonald's has, and capital is what McDonald's had. So those two things worked, and Chipotle's done well.
Yeah.
It's had a couple of hiccups here in the last couple of years, but...
So I don't follow and Chipotle at this point is publicly traded, correct?
It is,
so
yeah. McDonald's exited the deal when it went public.
Okay, gotcha. So I haven't been following any of that. I just know that Chipotle is by far and away my wife's favorite fast food restaurant. I don't even know if Chipotle qualifies as
they would take
food,
issue for calling it fast food. I
they
think
get you in and out relatively
quick
quickly.
casual is
Quick casual?
Yeah, the right frame for it in the industry.
Quick casual space, it's my wife's favorite by far. So before Chipotle was publicly traded, private company, they're looking for a partner to buy minority share, majority share, and kind of take them.
Well, for the kind of growth that was expected for the company, it was going to require some significant capital. So McDonald's took a majority share of the company.
Okay. So back to your time at McDonald's. How long ago was this?
I've been out of McDonald's for 15 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you were there for 30 plus.
I was, yeah.
In Chicago the entire time?
No, I started in McDonald's working for one of the original franchisees of the company in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. A fellow by the name of Jim Delegati. When I worked for Jim, he had the territorial rights for all the counties that surrounded Pittsburgh. And I left there and went to work for the company when I was 30. We had opened 50 restaurants in Pittsburgh. That franchisee had opened 50 restaurants in the Pittsburgh area. I, along with half a dozen guys, ran that company for him. So I got to do a lot of stuff real young, as a result of that. The U.S. company for McDonald's at the corporate level was seeing a lot of expansion opportunities in that part of the United States. So they wanted to get some corporate ownership in that area and they actually purchased the territorial rights back in a large number of the restaurants. And that's how I ended up working for McDonald's Corp.
Oh, because corporate purchased rights in that area?
Yeah, and I was one of the senior guys in Jim's organization, and had been interacting and interfacing with the corporate folks as part of my role. So I was kind of pigeonholed into going to work for the corporation.
I see. So what year was this where McDonald's is buying the area that you're working for in Pittsburgh?
This is rough. I lived in Chicago for 25 years. I've been here in Nashville, be 7 this coming year, so let's call it 32 years ago.
Okay.
So let's do our math, 2019, so 1986,
In the 80s?
85,
Okay.
yeah.
Yep. And so McDonald's really started to gain steam in the 80s? I was going to say
You
it
know,
was the
when I
70s,
joined
but-
McDonald's in the 70s, so I started working there in 1976. You can't hold me to this. My memory is about 1,000 restaurants back then.
Okay.
Primarily the United States. There might have been a little bit of toying outside the United States, but for the most part, it was a U.S. company. When I left McDonald's 15 years ago, McDonald's had 30,000 restaurants and operated in 120 countries.
Golly. And I am operating on information that you traveled quite extensively.
I did.
At some point in your McDonald's
I did,
career,
yeah.
correct?
I did.
And so what was your role when you were traveling internationally for McDonald's?
Well, both in the supply chain area and the corporate strategy area, those two
Okay.
areas. predominantly.
Okay.
I began at McDonald's in restaurant operations.
Okay.
And, you know, one of the values that McDonald's saw in me when I came over to the corporate side was my ability to interact with the franchisees because I understood their language.
Okay. Yeah.
And the fact that I had been part of Jim Delegati's organization, that was a pretty prominent type of a role. Just to give you a little bit of insight, since we're drilling down here into McDonald's, the Delegati organization, Jim's the fellow that invented the Big Mac. So that's a pretty big deal for McDonald's.
That's a very big deal for McDonald's.
So that, you know, that prominence came into my corporate life, the fact that I came out of that organization. And McDonald's wanted to leverage the fact that I understood how the operators thought. At the same time, I knew how to play a corporate role. So
Yes.
I was the translator.
Okay. So how did McDonald's navigate the relationship with their franchise owners versus corporate? Because I think it's a book that I was reading on KFC. They went through some difficult times. You know, a franchise owner came up with something, later feels like he didn't get their credit for it, and so on. And just it seems like that would be an easy relationship to go bad, poorly, between the franchise owners and corporate. So has McDonald's, my understanding is, by and large, McDonald's has done a pretty good job of maintaining those relationships, at least in the earlier years. Is that your understanding too? And how did McDonald's keep those relationships good?
It's complicated. Let me do my best to give you kind of a simple, straightforward answer. Of anyone in the franchise industry, McDonald's would be the company that would be identified as the top of the pile. You know, they're the guys that, you know, did the best with it. So you're right in, you know, your view of that. I can't speak to McDonald's today. I've been out for 15 years, but I can give you just kind of a snapshot. You need to think about McDonald's Corporation as more of a services company. The company itself doesn't operate a lot of restaurants, but what it does is it teaches independent entrepreneurs how to be successful in small business operating restaurants. So McDonald's Corporation is a big infrastructure house. And it's everything from real estate acquisition to construction, you know, of the commercial facilities, certainly the operations within those facilities, but it also includes things like legal advice and accounting, you know, support, information technology. All of those things are services that McDonald's provides to the franchisees. Just to kind of digress for a moment, as McDonald's entered the international marketplace, each country was set up as its own company. So the United States is a company in and of itself, but McDonald's in the UK is a company, as McDonald's in China is. Actually, a couple of those companies have gone public themselves. So McDonald's Japan was the first to do that. And then more recently, since I left McDonald's, the Latin American company went public.
And you're talking about essentially corporate. right? In those countries.
The restaurant operations in those countries.
The restaurant
became their own
operations
public
became-
corporation.
Yep. But then still separately, you have the
As
franchisees.
as a licensee of McDonald's, they would hold the license, but they'd be a public company.
Yes.
So they could bring in investors and allow them to accelerate their growth, open more restaurants.
Okay. Fascinating.
But McDonald's invested a lot in the relationship between the company and the franchisee. You know, in the early years where the U.S. was the biggest component of the business, it would not be unusual for McDonald's occasionally maybe to get ahead of itself and pick in a location, and it might not work out exactly as the company had hoped. And what McDonald's would do would be come in financially and support that franchisee until that market caught up. So there was a willingness on the behalf of McDonald's corporate to see the franchisee succeed. If they were diligently working in that business, it was to the benefit of McDonald's that those restaurants were successful, both for the franchisee and for the company.
Yes.
The company would use a metaphor of a three-legged stool, which gets overused a lot today. In the 70s, it was a new thought. And the legs were the corporation, the franchisee, and the suppliers. So McDonald's had the same view of its suppliers, which is why, to a great degree, as McDonald's grew, it was only privately held companies that were willing to invest in a new upstart. So as McDonald's became successful and grew, it never forgot that. And it stayed loyal to those early companies that helped them grow originally and created some multi-billion-dollar companies as a result of that were privately held.
Yes. You know, I might be wrong here. This did not cross my mind as I was preparing for this interview, but I'm thinking now, doesn't the bun lady in Nashville supply McDonald's, or am I wrong?
Cordia Harrington.
Yeah, Cordia Harrington. They call her the bun lady.
Yeah, so in my days at McDonald's, Cordia was a McDonald's franchisee in the U.S. company.
Yes.
She was in Eppingworth, Illinois, north of here, had a few restaurants. There's a funny story there, but I'll protect the innocent in this and just give you the end of the story. My areas of responsibility at that time caused one of our regional officers to interact with me and express that Cordia was really interested in becoming a supplier to McDonald's. Not something we had ever done. And it really wasn't a priority.
A franchisee going to a supplier was not
to
something
to become a supplier.
Done.
Yeah, it could, if not done well and carefully, it could create issues with other franchisees.
Sure.
But if you know Cordia, she is one of the more endearing people you'd ever meet. And she was a fantastic McDonald's franchisee. She did a great job with her restaurants. And just happened that the regional VP that was responsible for her area, he and I had grown up together, and we both had come out of the Delegati organization.
Okay.
So he had called me and said, "You got to help me here. It's hard to say no to Cordia," of which I didn't think it would be that hard.
Okay.
And so you now know the rest of the story. I said yes, and we put Cordia into business as a McDonald's baker.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, to your point about suppliers doing well, she's another person I'd love to have on the podcast, and I know her son, and I believe that we tried to tour one of their plants here locally a few months ago, and it didn't work out. I'd still like to do it. But I believe, this may not just be for McDonald's, but they're at the point now where they're making 1,000 buns, I want to say a minute, and I would need a fact check.
Cordia has a McDonald's plant out in Dixon. She's got a commercial plant here, real close to here in Nashville. She has a retail bakery that they acquired in the Atlanta area. And then she's done a joint venture in Central America on a bakery with the original McDonald's franchisee that, I'm trying to remember, it's not Nicaragua. I don't remember what country it is, but she's expanded.
Yeah.
If Cordia were sitting here with you, she'd tell you some great stories. We're family, and
Okay.
so if you need an introduction to Cordia, happy to do that for you.
On that. What were the early days like in McDonald's? If you were to go back, And I mean, if you were to try to attribute just their success to a few keys in the early days, what would you say that those might be?
There's a number of things that come to mind for me that were attributes of the company. It was a different time. And McDonald's became synonymous with middle America and the American culture. Mm-hmm. And it became such an attractive place for families where they could come and purchase food at really attractive pricing and create a family night out at a time when, the middle income of America wasn't what it is today. Things were, much tighter and simpler, and McDonald's gave them that escape. So I think, to a great degree, some of it was just that time was a great time for a concept like that. The second was their systems. I mean, McDonald's from its very beginnings was focused on how can we be consistent? What can we do so that every customer that comes to the counter gets a great experience? And the company was really good at creating those systems. There's a fellow that, Ray Kroc being the original founder, but one of the first guys that Ray brought in was a fellow named Fred Turner, who later became chairman of the company. Fred was the guy that came up with all those systems and really built, McDonald's became a training company. Yep. It taught folks how to do this well before that was ever a thought anywhere else. So from a systems and a training point of view, that really separated McDonald's. It gave it the wings to be able to grow as quick as it could and be a franchise organization. And the other thing that you can't escape is the quality of the products that McDonald's has. From a food safe point of view and a consistency point of view, McDonald's does more to ensure that than any other food company, I think, in the world.
To ensure what?
Food safety and consistency of product.
Okay.
Yeah. Most, if you were to go to the big food companies in the world, they have a term, they call it a McDonald's class food plant. So if a supplier is going to make products for McDonald's, often that, if it's a plant or if it's a production line in a plant, those are the best operations that those companies have, and they use that to benchmark their other operations.
Interesting. So, I feel like the average American doesn't think food safety when they think of McDonald's. They might think fast food, now this health craze, in some ways, like McDonald's maybe has been demonized.
Yeah.
So, but you're saying...
Well, fast food in general has been demonized.
That's true. Yeah. That's true. Yeah. But you're saying that McDonald's has these systems that ensure the quality or the safety of these foods. Now, I don't know what the common unsafe things would be, but mold or just bad things getting dated and then sold. I mean, what happens what are they guarding against when it comes to
just think about your kitchen at home. All right, think about when you make food. If I were to tell you that 75 or 80% of the times that you have an upset stomach is directly related to you and your kitchen practices and how you handle things in that kitchen. And then think about that and take it back to a restaurant level. Then go back from a restaurant level to a manufacturing plant level. Those things are all interconnected. And if you don't have those consistent practices all the way back to the sourcing of raw ingredients, you open opportunities for things to go wrong.
Yes. And if it goes wrong, it's going wrong at scale.
Oh, yeah.
As opposed to one kitchen and one house.
Oh, yeah. At scale.
I can imagine. Let me ask you this. I don't know if the learnings translate or not, because the franchise business model is a little different than, say, a privately owned company that has a corporate office in multiple locations, whether it's a manufacturing company or whatever it is. One of the difficulties when you have, say, a corporate office in multiple locations is the transfer of culture and communication.
Right.
We found this to be true. One location, we thought we had it figured out. 2 locations, we thought we had it figured out. We didn't realize until we got to that 3rd location that when you have plants or shops in different states, that's a entirely different ball of wax. Now, McDonald's obviously is doing a lot of things right. What do you think are there learnings that could be learned from McDonald's, even though that's a franchise, for a privately owned company with multiple locations on how to communicate culture and just communicate in general when you have people in different states?
I mean, the simple answer is you have to make an investment in time and people and capital. If you're not willing, if your business model can't account for that kind of investment, you're going to short circuit culture. Culture just doesn't happen. It's experienced, and for most people, it's not just being told how to do things. It's understanding why and then seeing it in application. So I think McDonald's had a big business model advantage that a lot of franchisors don't have. And its approach to franchising was protected because of it. So in the early days of the United States company, McDonald's made the decision to acquire its own real estate and own the real estate. Mm-hmm. So McDonald's as a corporation had an opportunity to generate a revenue stream as basically a landlord. Mm-hmm. So it would lease back the restaurants to the franchisees so that they didn't have to put up the money to get started. That way, you could be even more precise with the kind of people that you wanted to bring in as franchisees. You didn't have to turn to other big companies that had huge amounts of capital. Yes. You could go to individuals that wanted to make a life in a local community, mm-hmm. and they were committed to that community, and they became a core element of that town. Well, the business model allowed that to happen because you didn't have to go to individuals that were able to put up $1 million to build a building and buy a piece of real estate. Yes. McDonald's did that on their behalf, and then over the longer term, they then leased. Mm-hmm. And McDonald's business model was set up in such that as their business grew, so did McDonald's benefit from that. If their business didn't, then McDonald's didn't benefit as much because the leases were based on a percentage rent deal with, basically a floor that was set so that the franchisee was kept whole. Mm. Now, in that model, then, let me compare it for a second. So McDonald's in the U.S. company had a license service fee that was charged based on a percentage of net sales. Every franchisor does that. Doesn't matter, what segment of industry you're in. That's typically the mechanism that's used to generate revenue. Mm-hmm. In McDonald's case, all of that money, because there was a revenue source with McDonald's as a real estate company, yes, McDonald's could take all of that money and reinvest it back into training and the development of culture and helping the franchisees to be successful. No one else could do that because they didn't have a second revenue stream. So one of the ways to think about McDonald's in the United States was, and this is when I left, I don't know if it's still true, when I left 15 years ago, McDonald's was the largest commercial real estate holder in the United States. Mm. So when you get the business model set up that allows you to invest in that, when you account for that cost and build it in at the front end, you're more likely to succeed at it, yes, than to try and figure it out on the fly.
Yes, absolutely. So was McDonald's reinvesting the rental income from the properties, or you're saying they were essentially reinvesting
the service fees?
The service fees,
yeah.
Because they could make money on the leasing mm-hmm. fees.
Yeah.
Yeah. I actually wanted to ask you about the real estate thing. So I read a book probably 2 years ago called Grinding It Out. It's a story of McDonald's.
That's Ray's book, yeah.
Okay. It's a great book. I really enjoyed it. And then, of course, when the movie Founder came out, there were some guys from work that literally the day that movie came out, that night, they went and watched it. And a few weeks later, I watched it too. I really enjoyed the movie, which is on the story of McDonald's. But in the book, Grinding It Out, I believe it was it Ray Kroc or was it Fred Turner that there's like a light bulb moment where, I don't know if they said it in so many words, but like we're in the real estate business, maybe even more than we are in the burger business. Was that Kroc or was that?
I'm going to credit that to Ray,
okay.
though I'm not sure.
Okay. All right. So to your point, I was curious if they still saw themselves that way, and then I'm curious further on your personal thoughts on businesses that involve property and leasing. Is it generally better to try to buy the property that you operate out of as a business, or better to lease? I'm curious what your thoughts are there.
Well, he has two questions. Let me give you like the first one as a byline. I didn't see the movie,
Okay.
and that was intentional.
Okay.
And maybe it's because I'm an old guy now, but I didn't need to hear the Hollywood spin because I was there.
Okay. Yeah.
And I do giggle quite a bit because a number of folks that are my friends here in Nashville that aren't involved in McDonald's at all would come and ask me, okay, so it said this, and what do you think about that? And what I found is directionally it was okay, but Hollywood does stuff to reality. So I've stayed away from that.
They've got a business to run.
Yes.
They're going to make money.
I think it's safe to say relative to your question about own versus lease, that's best left to the financial types that want to drill down into the details. I'll make this observation. When you own a piece of real estate, the intrinsic value in that real estate remains with you. If you lease something, that intrinsic value stays with the person that owns the real estate. So the question isn't a financial question necessarily. It's a question of defining the intrinsic value and what does it bring to you. If that intrinsic value is about managing your brand from a long-term point of view, and you're going to give up the ability to control maybe some key attributes of your brand, then that decision logic is going to lean you in the direction of owning. Conversely, if you're more pressured about, from a market opportunity point of view, accelerating growth, and it's not so much about brand, but I have an opportunity now, and if I don't accelerate growth now, I may not get that opportunity, then the decision logic might lean in the direction of leasing. But once you get beyond those strategic ideas, you're really down in the weeds with the specifics of return on capital invested and those kinds of things.
Yep. And at that point, you can just run numbers and let the numbers tell you what to do, essentially. Okay.
I think that one of the mistakes that's often made in buy versus lease decisions is it's not handled at the strategic level first. It starts at the financial level, and then the strategic questions are left to the end.
Okay.
And I often think that's where some errors are made.
Yes, that makes sense. I'm curious, going back to your time at McDonald's when you're a corporate officer, and you made a statement, and I saw in research on you also, you were involved in corporate strategy. What would be an example of that?
Well, at the time that I was involved there, it was more about acquisitions.
Okay.
So McDonald's had been in the market actively looking for young restaurant brands or companies that the company felt fit the culture of McDonald's, wouldn't detract from brand McDonald's, the core brand McDonald's. So there was a lot of analyses done on the marketplace. Where was the restaurant space going? What were those opportunities? How could McDonald's best play in it? And in some cases, the research really wasn't about acquiring somebody, but it was about determining new direction for McDonald's, to be able to continue growing.
So Chipotle is a restaurant that's well known, people would know about, that McDonald's was involved in. Is there others that people would know about that?
Yeah, Boston Market.
Yeah.
If you remember, they grew really, really fast. There were some issues with the founders and the executive team with how the finances were handled that became pretty public. And they resulted in the company being cash poor and having to file for bankruptcy in Chapter 11. And at that point in time, I want to say they had 1,000 locations in the United States, something like that. It really needed to go through reorganization. It needed a new partner, owner, whatever. For McDonald's, they did have control of some sites that would have been great fits for McDonald's restaurants. So the original idea was you could pretty much pick it up for pennies on the dollar, just shutter the restaurant business and use the real estate for growth for McDonald's. And in that process, one of our guys who has since passed away and was the CEO of McDonald's later in his career, Jim Cantalupo, had in his mind that there were 300 or 400 of these restaurants that were doing really well. And the whole problem was they grew too fast. They lost control of their operations, and that's what got them in the problem. So a decision was made when we made our offer to keep a core group of them open and keep the brand alive. And I want to say McDonald's owned it for 5 to 7 years and sold it to a private equity firm that since has.
Okay. Yeah, fascinating. I want to go back to McDonald's system because it seems like it is legendary. What can the average, having experienced the McDonald's system in the early days and then for years and being involved with it to the level that you were, what can the average business owner, business leader, and even a private company, what could they learn from McDonald's systems, how they set it up or how they thought about it? What can be learned there?
Well, for me, my mind immediately jumps to the idea of integrity and character. In the 30 years that I worked at McDonald's, I can't recall a time where I was ever asked or it was ever implied that I shouldn't do the right thing. And for me, that's what set McDonald's apart. Whether it was the products that were being designed, or the relationship with the franchisees, or the suppliers themselves, there was just this innate, it was more than an acceptance. It was as if it was part of the DNA. We're going to do what's right. And that's freeing when you think about your business career. And it doesn't really matter whether you come at it from a Christian perspective or you come at it from an atheist perspective. The fact that there was that certainty made all the difference.
Yeah, that's interesting because I think a lot of people wouldn't necessarily think of that when they think of a large company like McDonald's coming back to integrity and character and doing the right thing. So it's encouraging to hear that. I was curious, just as a believer and a family man and having those values, did your values as a husband, family man, and specifically believer ever conflict with your role at McDonald's?
Sure. I'll give you a couple examples. My lifestyle was more conservative than most. I mean, McDonald's was a fast-driving company, and it was all about growth. If you look at anything written about McDonald's, the culture was an accelerated culture. There were a couple of things that were probably almost without saying expected. You had to be quick on your feet, which meant intellectually you had to be able to process information fast. It wasn't a reflective company. It wasn't the kind of place where if you were the kind of guy that were posed with a problem that you got to go back and think about it and come back 2 days later. It was driven to move.
Okay.
So if you weren't quick on your feet, it's going to be a problem for you.
Okay.
The second thing that comes to mind for me is, McDonald's wasn't exempt from what was going on in society and has since then and now. Alcoholism and divorce was a big deal. In an environment where you're growing exponentially and everything's moving fast, there was an expectation of workload, that fit with that. And I mean, there was just a lot of reason to be careful. My wife and I have been married now 42 years. And I'm a rare exception in the McDonald's environment.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember what the rate was, but divorce was a pretty significant thing there. So from a work point of view, I protected that.
Mm-hmm.
And that wasn't always the case with guys.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and how would that kind of flesh itself out at a daily or granular level? You would just make sure you went home at a certain time, or maybe how did that kind of play itself out?
well, the umbrella for me was my faith, and I was not private about it.
Mm.
So in my business career, the folks that I reported to were well aware of my faith conviction.
Okay.
And they understood that for me, the partying life wasn't part of it. But from a social point of view, I was always available. And, from a relational and a networking point of view, I valued that. It's just I didn't have to drink. I didn't have to get drunk.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have to do questionable things at all to fill my free time if, we were traveling. And I think that was, in an environment like that, a guy like me being around at the level I was a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
It created a little bit of kind of wiggle room for others.
Mm-hmm.
And, I'll share one just quick sideline story with you. I don't know if this plays or not, but I was traveling once I think I was going to China. It was a long flight, and there was a fellow that was going to travel with me that was our head of quality assurance in the area of meat products. So bright guy, PhD from Texas A&M, and a really smart guy. Happened to be of Mexican descent, and he was a naturalized U.S. citizen. And I still remember sitting down on the airplane, and he was seated next to me for a long ride. And he said to me, do you mind, no sooner we sat down on the plane, do you mind if I ask you a personal question? My immediate reaction was, okay, this is going to be a long flight. Because the fellow worked in the organization, but he didn't report to me. I didn't know him that well.
Okay.
I had been in meetings with him. I certainly was involved from a point of his expertise being included in decision making and such. And he asked me a completely unexpected question. He says, I watch you all the time. Okay. And what I watch is how, because of your role, you're often involved in the conflicts and the bigger issues in the company. And you're so calm. And I've always seen that about you. And I'd love for you to explain to me, how can you do that? And I turned around and I looked at him, and I don't say this because I think I've got anything cornered, but I looked at him and I said, well, here's what you've got to come to grips with. I'm going to reach into my bag, and I'm going to pull a Bible out of my bag. And I'm going to give you an answer that's probably going to take us an hour or two of conversation. If you don't want that, that's great. He said, no, I'd like to. So for the next couple of hours on the airplane, I shared faith with him. Nothing really ever, came of it that I'm aware of. And then a couple of years later, Patty and I are at a dinner function. It must have been a charity thing for McDonald's. And this beautiful Hispanic woman walks up behind me with my wife sitting next to me and lays this kiss on my cheek, who I have no idea who she is. And now I'm squirming, right? And Patty's kind of looking at me, and she introduces herself to Patty and I, and it was this gentleman's wife.
Oh, wow.
And all she said to me that night, because it was in we couldn't have had a personal conversation. She said, you'll never know what you did for our family. Just turned around and walked away.
Wow.
So when I can recount other things like that, that made all the difference for me.
Yeah.
Now, to go back to your question, the folks that I reported to understood that I wasn't trying to chase a career. They understood that what was more important for me was ministry and my faith, but that I was going to be the best possible contributor as I could be. One of the things that, I came to faith as a believer when I was 30 years old. I've always been pretty quick on my feet. Never had a problem keeping up. That's just the way God made me. But I can tell you, because of that, I was pretty lazy. I did what I had to do to stay ahead of the average guy.
Okay.
When I came to faith, I was crushed with a new perspective, and that was I needed to be excellent in whatever I did. So I made a commitment to myself that when it came to my work, I would never, ever suggest that I had too much to do, or that a project was too difficult, or that I couldn't complete something that needed completed. So my mantra at work was I was the guy that always got stuff done. And that was because of my faith. And I contend that God used that to keep me in corporate America, because I turned down things often. And in the environment that I was in there, or in any corporate environment, you just don't do that. You're usually on the outside pretty quick.
Yeah.
McDonald's gave me freedom for that.
What was it about the Christian faith that gave you motivation to work harder and be more excellent in your work?
Well, I don't know if it's so much about the Christian faith as it was about what changed in me.
Okay. And what was that?
So, I grew up in a, lower income area without really a church background to speak of. My brother and I would attend church on occasion, and my parents would stay home, which was kind of an interesting thing growing up.
Older brother, younger brother?
I have a brother that's a little over a year older than I am.
Okay.
My parents were older. They married after World War II, and they were both in their 40s. Had a couple of kids. So I tell people I had a granddad when I was in high school.
Okay.
And a grandma, too, really. But for me, my wife and I had been married for 10 years when I came to faith. We both came to faith at the same time. We had 3 sons, loved our kids, couldn't get along with each other for anything.
Has that gotten any better?
And when we came to grips with our own selfishness, our natural bent as human beings to choose self over anything else, and I came to realize just what Christ did for me, I didn't have a choice. I was compelled to just be different. And that, I've never looked back.
Yeah, that's really encouraging. What I love about that is here you have, it sounds like you're a first-generation believer. You weren't raised
We are.
in faith.
Both my wife and I are.
Oh,
yeah.
Wow. Okay.
My wife grew up in a Catholic home.
Okay.
Went to Catholic high school even.
Oh, fascinating. Yeah. So here you have, a guy that's smart, doing well, not a believer, becomes a believer, and takes serious, not to put words in your mouth, but the Bible talks about doing work as unto the Lord. And if we really think about, okay, today I'm going to do my work as unto the Lord. Like we read over that so quickly. And but if you actually do your work as unto the Lord, man, you're going to do the best job that you possibly can. And I just think it's a thing that we may have wrong sometimes, because correct or incorrect, sometimes there is a perception that if you're a believer or things of the church, it's going to be a little bit more mediocre. It's okay maybe not to be the best, but that's just not the case at all.
Well, I don't think it's biblical. I think it's not just a mandate for us to be excellent in all things. More than that, it's a question of how deep is our faith. I mean, if the master of the universe is willing to sacrifice his very son to shed blood and die, I mean, isn't there a response? I mean, that's the question I think we all have to deal with. It's not just a question of believing. It's a question of what is it that I believe?
Yes.
And if I truly do believe that this is the transaction for me, then I think it's a natural reaction to want to do the best you can.
Yes.
Doesn't mean you're perfect. Doesn't mean you're not going to have failures in your life. But I do think in the long run, it will become apparent to everyone that you do.
Mm-hmm. So I have just another question or two on McDonald's, and I'm going to have to move on to other topics that I really want to get to.
I'm glad you're leaving McDonald's because I haven't worked there in 15 years.
So this may be hard to answer.
I'm answering your questions, by the way, sitting here thinking, gee, now what kind of trouble can I get into for answering this question this way?
Yeah. Well, I wondered, with a publicly traded company, but I'm sure you're fine. But this may be hard to recollect because it's been a while. But
I've been careful to tell you only things that I know are public.
Yes, perfect. I appreciate that. It's totally fine. Back to when you were there and kind of the height of your career there. Average day, you go into the office, what time? You're going home at what time? And are you in meetings all day? Are you traveling most of the time? What did that kind of look like? I'm sure there was a wide variety. But
There was. If you want to speak to in the office, when a lot of meetings, a lot of coordination going on, and it depends on really what level you're at in the company. But it's not unlike most big corporations where you've got to coordinate things and you've got multi-layers of people, and the idea of delegation and responsibility and accountability is varied, and it just takes a lot of effort. We were the kind of a company that valued collaboration. So while we were moving quickly, we were also taking time to listen. Not perfectly, but you could have a voice and make an impact at different levels in the company. So a normal day, I'm an early riser, and often I would be in the office around 7 or 7:30. The day could be filled with meetings. There could be a dinner in the evening, with some stakeholder or some group of stakeholders, or there might be, a function that you needed to attend. So on the weeks that you were in town and not traveling, the days were pretty long. I had a principle of trying to manage it that if I was going to be in town, for 5 days, I wouldn't be out in the evening more than 2 or 3, so that I could be home 2 or 3 evenings during the week.
Okay.
I actually, back to the as a believer, doing the best you can. I once was questioned when I was climbing the ranks by an executive, and he looked at me and he didn't realize, today this stuff couldn't happen, but he looked at me and he said, Wayne, we're not sure we can trust you. Okay. Why is that? Well, you always get everything done and your desk is always clean and no one sees you around here at 9 or 10 o'clock at night. And he was dead serious, and I took it as a compliment, but, that was the way it was, back then. So, when I think about the routine, you could spend your whole life there. Now, traveling, I'll just make a couple of comments about it, particularly international travel, which is very taxing. I tried to do as much as I could in as little amount of time as I needed to spend. So when I traveled, from the moment I got up until the moment I made it back to the hotel, I packed stuff in. Because if I could take a day or 2 off of an international trip, that's good for my family, and it got me back to other things that needed done. I had a principle that I held my direct reports accountable for when it came to international travel, because it became a problem. And that was no one could be out more than one weekend. There were times guys would, be out 2 or 3 weeks at a crack and come home, and they weren't allowed to stay out more than one weekend unless I approved it.
Okay.
So, but that wasn't the case throughout the company.
Yes,
and
but that was your direct.
That was my. Yeah, that's kind of how
international travel specifically.
Yes.
Okay.
It was.
And you just saw if they're spending 2 weekends internationally, problems crop up.
Well, not only that, you got to ask the question: how efficient are you?
Yeah. Okay. Gotcha.
Have you really organized your time? But I was concerned about family.
Yes.
There was enough problems with family in the world at that time.
Yes.
If I could help by setting a standard in place, I was perfectly comfortable doing that.
Yes. And you may have already answered the question, but I am curious. So you're in your 30s. You have 3 boys.
Yep.
And you have an opportunity to work as much as you want to, essentially, and you're kind of rising through the ranks. Did you have things that for you really tried to make happen, like no working on the weekends or be home 2 out of 5 nights, or were there other things like you tried to make sure happened so that your kids saw you some and your wife saw you some and you could still serve your family?
We did. For the most part, unless there was travel involved, we really protected Saturday and Sunday.
Mm.
And then as my sons got into middle school and high school, they all played sports.
Mm.
So I made it a practice to be at every game.
Okay.
Unless I was out of town, I was at every game.
Mm-hmm.
So we did those kinds of things. We always had dinner together as a family. We created an environment in our home where we were the landing spot for anybody. So, it would not be unusual for there to be on our weekends, a dozen other guys and gals at our house.
Okay.
And we became, like second parents to a lot of teenagers over the years. So we just tried to build that kind of an environment. Sunday was church. Back in the day, you went to, now in my case, I was an elder pastor in a church. So, we were in a church that had 3 services on Sunday morning, and we were there for all 3.
Boys and everything?
Boys and everything.
Wow.
And back in the day, churches did meet on Sunday evening, and we'd be back at church on Sunday evening. In most cases, the lunch meal was the meal on Sunday, and we always had people to the house.
Okay.
So
wow,
Sunday was, we worked hard at family just like we worked hard at work.
Yeah, yep.
And I have the world's greatest wife, just to be clear.
So I want to circle back around to family in a bit, but I did want to ask you, you were on the board of Chipotle.
For a while, yeah.
Yep. And board of directors, I assume? At that point, it's a publicly traded company.
No, it's private.
Oh, okay.
McDonald's and the Ells family and some of their minor investors, yeah.
Okay.
I was not, when it went public, McDonald's exited.
Gotcha. Okay. So better yet. So at this point, Chipotle is a privately held company. McDonald's does have a stake in it, and you're on the board. So how often did the board meet? What were the things?
Well, it was quarterly, and at that time, a lot of it was planning for growth. Steve Ells just created a brilliant concept. And beyond that, you were asking me about culture earlier. He had really done a great job at building pride and culture into that organization. It was small, but it was no small feat, what Steve had done. But to take something from 14 or 15 or 20 locations to 1,000 locations, that's not an easy feat.
Yep.
So in the early days, a lot of the investment was in figuring out how are we going to supply the products at larger scale. How do we identify a real estate strategy for growth? Because in the Chipotle model, they were leased locations, they weren't owned. So you had to, really have a solid real estate strategy. So supply and real estate. The company had decided to, for the most part, the restaurants were all owned by the corporation, so it wasn't a franchise operation. So it then becomes, what's the management team look like? What does the infrastructure from a staffing point of view need to be for growth? So when I was on the board, it was really all about that, getting ready for growth.
Okay. And quarterly for a day, or how long were these
meetings? The meetings were once a quarter.
Okay.
But each of us kind of, I don't know if the right word is adopted, but developed a relationship with one of the management team guys, and we were always available by phone. Maybe there might be a couple of extra trips every once in a while to something, to a new store opening, to go visit a supplier that was going to be involved, that kind of thing.
Okay, interesting. Okay. So you had the board had some direct contact with some of the management team. It didn't all necessarily flow through the CEO.
Oh, Steve was involved in all of it.
Sure.
It's a small organization, Ken.
Yeah.
So you're talking 20, 30 people.
Yeah, yeah.
At the time.
Let's see where I want to go from here. I do want to just ask a few questions about business in general because of your experience there. Well, let me ask this since we're talking about boards. Then, what are your thoughts on just a privately owned company? Say even a family-owned company. When would you recommend for a privately owned company or family-owned company to maybe install or create a board of advisors, which is a little bit more informal, or even board of directors, just to help with the governance of a privately owned company? Are there certain sizes or complexities of business that you would, or if the owner wants to step away and he hires another CEO, or what do you think would be triggers for a privately owned company to install either a board of advisors or board of directors?
I don't know how I can do justice to answer that completely. I can give you some experiences that I have, and maybe that provides some insight. Today, I own a company that is in the food manufacturing business. Yeah, it's fairly significant. It's on a very steep growth rate. It's 250 employees, and my 3 grown sons are in that business with me. So we have a board of directors. Myself and one of my sons is on the board, and they rotate, that position. I've got a private equity guy on the board, an outsider on the board that actually came out of a big consumer products company, and then a financial investor type, on the board. That works well because you bring outside voices into the things that you are thinking about. And yet you don't have to give up control in a private company. The board of directors in a private company doesn't have the right to make equity type decisions. The owners of the company maintain that. So you're really not giving anything up. You're just gaining perspective, in that process. So I guess the simple answer would be, why wouldn't you want some outside perspective at anything that you do?
Yes.
The real question becomes clarity around what the expectations are of that person and what their role is. Where I see it kind of come off the tracks for folks, particularly in the private enterprise category, it's unclear what that role of the board member is. You use the word governance. Well, I would suggest to you that in a private company, governance is the responsibility of the owners of the company. And, in a public company, others stand in to provide governance because you've got this large group of owners that can't represent themselves. But in a private company, your equity holders are accountable for that. So a board member in a private company is going to have a voice. They're not going to have the same voice they would have in a public company.
Yes. So in your case, is there 3 people and then your son, one of your sons and yourself?
Yep.
Essentially on the board?
Yep.
So it's 5 of you?
Yes.
And I'm just curious, you're probably meeting quarterly in person?
Yes. We've done one not because travel was an issue for a couple of guys, but it's meant to be an in-person meeting.
Okay.
Yes.
And do you pay them do you give them some equity, or do you just pay them, or are these people that you just know and trust and they're happy to help out?
It's a combination of pay and equity.
Okay. And you're after these are people you trust, and you're after their insights and experiences and their advice into the companies is essentially why you would put together this board.
Right.
Okay. All right. Fascinating. Yeah, I appreciate that. It's something that I'd like to learn a lot more about. We don't have board of directors in really any of our companies, but I can see the advantages, and so just wondering what you think are triggers where that should really be used, and how to set it up.
Well, it could be even more of a journey in a services company. That's smaller. It's really just formalizing kind of a roundtable of advisory feedback,
Mm-hmm.
and that could be 3 to 5 people that you just get together with occasionally.
Mm-hmm.
Or when you're going to have some kind of an event in the business that you want someone else's thought, you join them together then. It doesn't have to be scheduled once a quarter.
Yep.
It can be more random in that case. And then as you grow, like anything else, things just require a little more formality.
Yes. Yep. So I'm curious, just with your experience in business in the past and now, and others that I know you're involved with, if you were to start or take over a business, but the net result is you're leading this business, do you have personal particular habits or behaviors or systems like that are going to go with you? Almost no matter what business you're going to be leading, you're going to do these couple of things. Does anything come to mind?
Well, we're going to go back to what I said earlier that was, an important component of McDonald's, and that is having a foundational character attribute of your business, that everything that you are going to do is going to be based on doing the right thing. And what I've tagged on, if you were to talk to anybody in our management team in our food manufacturing company, you'd probably hear them say this: we're going to do the right thing, especially when it hurts us. One of the things that I've found in my experiences, particularly with believers, and I don't mean to take a pot shot, but I think it's worth saying, it's easy to speak of things of integrity and character when everything's going well. I like to say, when the sky is blue and there's a gentle breeze, it's just pretty out. Everybody has character and integrity.
Yeah.
When things aren't going right, when the storm comes and the sky is falling, too often character goes and hides in a corner. And what precedes it then, or supersedes it, is how can I get out of this so it doesn't matter what I do, just help me get out of this. And that surfaces in a couple of ways. I've found that it can surface in silence when something does need to be said about it, and go along with something that's just wrong. Sometimes it can surface in taking actions that are meant to just benefit yourself at someone else's expense. And sometimes it can mean just flat out not telling the truth, and using deception to hide perhaps an accountability that you have. So for me, if you really mean it, then the next time something goes wrong, you're willing to make it right. You're willing to absorb whatever the impact of that is for you to make it right. And you're going to know that by doing that, it sends a signal to everyone in your organization that doing the best matters. I just don't see that happening a lot. I don't see it happening a lot in corporate America. I don't see it happening a lot in private businesses. And I don't always see it happening in the church.
So I actually want to ask about that. So let's come back to that in just a second. But I just want to make sure I don't pass over this too quickly. Is there anything else? So you're about to lead a business, whatever that is, you're going to make sure you do the right thing. Is there anything else that would come to mind? Just even a granular or practical?
Well, I mean, some of this stuff is it's just overstated by a lot of folks. Everybody's got a slogan or a strategy approach. You have to start with the end in mind. I mean, I would suggest that before you start marching out, you have a very clear idea. What am I trying to accomplish? And once I understand that, what is going to be required for me to accomplish that? What resources is it going to take? What timeline is it going to take? What research have I done to minimize the risk in doing that? So I think a planning component, there's the corporate strategy coming out of me, a planning component is really important. And a lot of folks have a great idea and they just march off with the great idea without thinking it through. And then they wake up one morning and they're out of money, or they've made some mistakes had they thought about it for a little bit before they acted. might have done well. So I mean, that's a big one that comes to mind for me.
No, that's a good one.
I would also tell you, do something that you love doing.
Mm.
You know, if you want to be successful, pick something that others have told you you're good at. Or you can look back at your own personal experiences and you've succeeded at it. You know, start off with something that you got a leg up on.
Yes.
You know, I am not going to build the next rocket ship. You know, but if you ask me, can I do some pretty cool things in food? Probably.
Yeah.
Am I good at process thinking that can apply across category? Yeah, probably. I know I'm not an inventor. And I know that when I start trying to think that I can invent things, they usually don't work. So what I've concluded is I'm best utilized at taking things that have already been invented and figuring out the business models and the way to grow it.
Yes.
So I don't mess with things that I know I'm not good at.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so key. And I think that people just need to be, there's a way that you kind of know that at a head level, and yet you still find yourself trying to operate outside of your strengths and talents. And then there's a way that you know that at kind of the heart, you're just okay with being who you are, being okay with your strengths and running in them and knowing what you're not. I totally agree with that. So let's come back to the doing the right thing. I'm curious where do people most commonly go wrong here? You know, they have character when the sun's shining and there's a warm breeze. Where does it most go wrong? Is it a business challenge? Is it relational? And I'm just curious if you have examples, even of your life or in other people's lives, you've noticed where they did the right thing in a tough time.
Wasn't prepared for examples with that.
If you don't need any examples. I'm just curious if you have kind of observations where people most commonly go wrong, because I really do resonate with what you're saying, and I think it's one of those things where it's best thought about and prepared for before you're in a tricky situation.
Let me give you this is going to sound like a little generic, but it's based on an actual thing that happened in our food company. There was a customer that took a position that there was a problem with a product. Absolutely not a problem. Prove it's not a problem. It's fine. Everything's good. But that didn't take away from a middle manager in a big corporation having an unreasonable thing because somebody gave him a hard time. We could have went over his head. We could have made an issue of it. Instead, we looked at the opportunity in that account and said, the right thing in this case is for us to replace the product, us pay for it, and not make an issue of it. And that once the dust settled, then to go have the conversation after the pain and the suffering is all over on here's what really did take place and here's what did happen.
Yep.
And that paid dividends, in that regard. So sometimes it's just, it is about, product satisfaction, customer satisfaction. But some of it's about just business practices. Here's an example I'll give you. It may not sit well. I don't know. I'm always intrigued by folks that want to talk about that they are a Christian company. I don't even know what that is. Yeah. Okay? And often I find that folks want to talk about that they're a Christian company because they believe inside it'll give them a leg up in getting a piece of business. Or it'll make them look good to somebody. Can't our food business, just speaking to that, we are not a Christian company. We're a company operated by some really solid conservative Christians. But, it's a company.
Yeah.
And we're not going to use the brand of we're Christians to make you feel guilty that you need to give us a higher price, or that you need to buy something from us, or you need to treat us special because we're gentle and we really need to be taken care of. I've never understood that. So even when I say do the right thing, it's about motives. And I think that we deceive ourselves when we believe that people don't see through it.
Right. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's just a couple things that come to mind.
Yeah, I appreciate it. So I do want to ask about Old Hickory Smokehouse.
Yeah.
And I definitely want to get to some things about working with your boys. But first of all, tell us, I'm curious, I already know, but tell the listeners what Old Hickory Smokehouse is, and I'm curious how it got started.
So the business we have here in Nashville is a food manufacturing business. We cook meat. So, fancy word would be we smoke meat, we rotisserie meat, we roast meat, beef, pork, chicken, in some cases some seafood. You would best, relate to our products. We are a supplier to the Panera restaurant chain. We make some smoked chicken for them that's used on their sandwiches and salads. We, in the restaurant space also, we make brisket and pork for the Chili's restaurant chain. We have products in grocery stores. We sell food to like the big broadline distributors like Cisco and US Foods, those kinds of folks. So, that's what we do.
So the meat is going to come in uncooked or raw?
Yeah, we bring in whole muscle product that we have to trim, season, sometimes inject with things like juices and that kind of thing. And then we cook it.
Okay. Now, when you say...
And then we pack it. Sometimes we slice it, sometimes we shred it.
Okay. I'm sure this varies, when it leaves, do they need to actually recook it then? Like, does Panera recook it, or you're saying they just...
No, it's a fully cooked product.
Fully cooked. Okay.
In the case of some folks, they may have us cook it to a certain temp so that they can reheat better.
I see.
But no, it's all fully cooked product.
Okay, gotcha. And you said something maybe I didn't hear correct. When it comes in, is this meat on the bone? You're kind of slicing off the bone, or no? It's coming in. You might have to season it, but it's ready to go.
So most of the meat is deboned.
Okay.
When we do pork, a lot of times we'll bring in a bone-in pork butt because it gets us a better, juicier, moister product by actually roasting the meat with the bone in, and then we debone it after we cook.
I see. And I love to see the plant because I hear it. I mean, it's quite an operation the way it sounds.
Yeah, there's a lot going on there.
You're shipping this stuff all over the place, and like you said, 250 employees.
Yeah.
When you send it out, I'm just curious. Is it because I just know nothing about this world? You put it on pallets and wrap it, and it goes in a tractor trailer. I mean, how do you ship this meat?
You just described how it ships.
Okay.
Yeah. So it goes in a shipping case of some kind that's loaded on a pallet that's shrunk wrap and goes on a tractor trailer, and it ends up somewhere.
Okay. Does any of it leave? Does any of it get transported by rail, or is it all truck?
We have a line of products where we are a Department of Defense contractor. So for the U.S. Navy and the U.S. Air Force, we make a line of frozen sandwiches that goes overseas. Gets loaded on aircraft carriers, or it goes to an air base in the Middle East. So those products, we load them on a rail container that goes on a train here in Nashville, takes it to a port, and then it gets put on an ocean-going carrier to the Middle East.
Oh, fascinating. But you guys are assembling that sandwich. It's ready to go?
Yep, frozen. Yep.
Okay, gotcha. I didn't know it was something you guys were into. And so when did this get started, and how did it get started?
Well, no, not at all, actually. Didn't plan on being in business with my sons, didn't plan on living in Nashville. Yeah, this has all been kind of God's doing. So I have to rewind for a second. I'm at corporate McDonald's. My oldest son, Wayne, had graduated from college and took a position in a food company in Chicago that was privately held by a family that went to our church. And shortly after he got involved in that, there were some issues in the business. It wasn't doing well, and he asked me to come and meet with the owner and give him some advice and that kind of thing. And Wayne had put together a business plan. He was doing some consulting work for them initially on a sales and marketing kind of thing, and he had an idea for how it could go. He was married. His wife was pregnant with our first grandson, and it looked like the business was going to go down. So you kind of got to know my wife, Patty. Her position was, you're going to take care of this because you're the big corporate guy that knows how to fix everything. And my grandson is going to have a father with a good job, and my daughter-in-law is not going to have to worry about that, so go figure it out.
This is Patty's message to you.
Yes.
Not Wayne J.
This is Patty's message to me.
Okay.
Yeah. So I had to get special permission to mess with this, and the quick answer is myself and a friend of mine put some money in the company to put it back up and took a majority position in the company. I'd like to tell you that was the beginning of an awesome run. It wasn't. We ended up having to buy out the original family for a number of reasons that I want to protect them, and I don't want to get into that. But we took over the business, realized that the business model was faulty, and pretty much shut the business down. Reinvested in it to turn it into a frozen food USDA plant, and then started back up again, pursuing different product lines. That business got involved in a number of other things. We did really well for a good period of time, did a couple of joint ventures with folks that we're since out of. And in the midst of that, one of our customers, the U.S. Army, back in the day when there was 160,000 troops in the Middle East, we were shipping a lot of food to them. They had asked us to take a look at solving a problem they had with barbecue ribs. They would take them in raw overseas and try and get locals to cook them and basically serve them to our troops, and it wasn't going well. So Wayne spent a lot of time with a couple of guys in the barbecue space that are well known to learn how it's done, and then came back and figured out how to do it commercially on our end and solve the Army's problem with ribs. And at that time, the whole barbecue smoked meat category was really taken off in the U.S. So we had, a complete industry research paper done on that space and realized that the expected growth in that category was really impressive, and that there weren't a lot of large manufacturers in that space, and there wasn't much capacity in the industry to really be able to deal with the growth. So we took the biggest risk a private company could take, and we built a plant south of here in Lewisburg, Tennessee, without a customer.
Wow.
Without
a customer.
Based on a business plan.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
And how's that working?
We just got done with an expansion. We opened the plant. We actually started selling to customers the end of 2014, beginning of 2015. Mm-hmm. We've just expanded this year, and we're in conversations with some really big customers that would require us to expand again. Mm-hmm. So, we went from 30 employees to 250 in 18 months.
Wow.
So,
congratulations.
Yeah, it was a pretty big deal.
So, working with your boys, how did that come to be? Was that something that they wanted, or did it just so happen?
So it started with Wayne because that's where he was.
Okay.
He was in that company, and he's my oldest. He has 5 kids. His oldest son is 16.
Okay.
His youngest is 8, I think.
So your 3 boys is rough ages. I know they all have kids.
Wayne's around 40, which would make Brandon 37, 38-ish, and Justin 35, 36-ish. They're like 2 years apart, roughly, from each other. Wayne and Heidi have 5 children.
Okay.
Brandon and Caitlin have 4 boys. Wayne's got a combination. He has 3 boys, 2 girls.
Okay.
Brandon has 4 boys and 1 foster son. Okay. So they have 5 boys in their house. And then Justin has 2 girls.
Okay.
So we have 11 grandkids, 12 counting the foster son.
Yes. And were all 3 of your sons involved in this company when it started?
No, only Wayne. Only Wayne.
Okay.
So my middle son, Brandon, Wayne and Brandon, the oldest in the middle, both went to college on the West Coast to a private Christian school called the Masters College. If you know anything about John MacArthur, it's a school that he's the president of. Wayne came back. Wayne found his wife in California at school. Heidi is a missionary kid. She grew up in Papua New Guinea. So Wayne married Heidi. They came back to Chicago. Wayne got involved in the food business. So I ended up in business with him. Brandon, when he got to school, he stayed in California and went into ministry. He was at a Baptist church in just Canyon Country, Santa Clarita, Valencia area, north of Los Angeles. They stayed there 10 years, I think. He was everything from the youth pastor of the church. They had a K through 12 school. He was, a high school Bible teacher, athletic director, the drill, just doing a lot of different things. And then my youngest son, Justin, he graduated from Wheaton College with a finance economics degree. He was going to go work in the financial markets. I want to say it was Prudential recruited him to Southern California in their financial markets. They were going to put him through USC to get his MBA. And I tell you this to answer your question. So actually, Justin, the youngest, came back into the business second.
Okay.
Brandon's in ministry. Justin went to take his position on the West Coast, and he called me the day that he took it. And he said, I got good news and bad news. Okay, let's quit the games. Just give me the answer. He said, well, they offered me a lot more money than I expected. Great. How could there be bad news? Well, I told him no.
This is Justin.
Yeah, this is Justin. I said, well, why did you tell him no? He said, well, after spending the afternoon with these guys, so one thing that I took away from the Wayne Wolf house is what it is to live by your faith and to have character. And it was obvious to me that the values these people have are very different than the values you raised us with. So here's the deal. I told them no. I'm coming home. I expect you to find me a deal like you found Wayne.
And you did?
And I did. So we had a joint venture for a number of years that Justin had the opportunity to work in and grow and build. And so the 2 of them are now back in Chicago, Wayne and Justin. Brandon is still on the West Coast. And I think they had their 3rd son by then. And, he's in L.A. making little money. And, they're in a tiny apartment. And, he called home one day and went, okay, Dad, I'm working 7 days a week, morning to night. I'm not spending any time with my family. And, we're just getting by. I think I need to make a change. So I'm coming home. I want the deal that Wayne and Justin had.
And you did. You got one done for him too.
Yeah. So, but I messed up on his. We had a business in the healthcare space for a while that was focused on executive consulting with big hospitals, and all of our customers were in California. So he moved to Chicago to get on a plane every Monday and fly to California. So after about a year of that, he went, Dad, I think we're going back to California. Okay. So they actually moved back to California. And in the midst of that was when we discovered this big opening in this meat space. So he and one of the other guys that were in that consulting company actually put the research paper together.
I see.
And when we finally figured it out, we mothballed the consulting company, and he came to Nashville and took over everything sales and marketing. So he does sales and marketing. Wayne, the oldest, he's the guy that invented our cooking equipment, and he's our operations guy. Anything to do with plant manufacturing is Wayne. He's just amazing. Couldn't be, the industry sees him that way. And then Justin handles anything administrative for our company. So whether it's finance, HR, banking, you think about it, that's Justin.
And were there particular agreements or guardrails you put up or understanding that you made clear with your boys as they came to work in the company, hey, we're all going to be in this together. Here's what we're not going to do, or here's what we're going to do. Was there anything that you kind of set up beforehand?
I didn't.
Okay.
But let me answer it completely. Our family, Patty and I came to faith when we were 30. Wayne would have already been 6 years old, 7 years old. And it was transformative for the way that we lived. It changed us dramatically. And in the process of that change, we really invested in our sons. Relationally, from a biblical training perspective, but yet we really worked at them developing their own faith. I'd like to tell you how great of parents we were, not so much as God is a great God. And we're blessed to have 3 sons that are all committed to their faith, 3 daughter-in-laws that are as committed to their faith, and relationships in our family where we all really get along. So I didn't have a need to do that. And I find it just fascinating, that God made them each different from a gifting point of view, but those different gifts perfectly come together in the operation of our business. And they're all very comfortable with, like, Wayne would not want to do sales and marketing. Justin would not want to do plant operations. And it works. Now, what's the underpinning of that? The strength of their faith made them friends. So it's not just that they're brothers, they're friends. So I just didn't see a need to do it. And I realize that's kind of unusual. And that's why I say I'm just blessed. I mean, sure. I walk around happy.
Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. That is a blessing. So which leads to the next question. It does seem to me, Justin is the only son that I've met.
Right.
Based on how you've talked about him and the research.
I blamed him for me talking to you. Yes.
Wonderful. Well,
but then Michael told me you're a good guy, so go have fun.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Michael. But it does seem like you and your wife Patty have raised these 3 boys successfully, and I'm just curious, what are some of the things that looking back that you think that you guys did as parents that were helpful, and is there anything that you would do different?
There's always stuff you do different. I'll tell you a couple of things that when we talk with parents that both of us emphasize, and we can't take credit for them. They just kind of came out of what others poured into us. But from when we came to faith, when they were small, we prayed with our sons individually every night. So it wasn't 3 of them as a group and let's just get through it. It was if both of us were home. If I was traveling, it would be Patty alone. But if both of us were home, we would go in with each one of them individually, talk to them about the day, talk to them about what we could pray together about, and we prayed with our kids. And I think that had a huge mark on their spiritual lives. If Justin were here, he's probably better at verbalizing this, because when I do men's speaking at times and he's in the room, he loves to embarrass me and tell stories. So one of his favorite stories is that they call me the Bible dad. And I learned quickly that I'm just a steward of those boys and that they belong to God. And I get to be called father, but their real father is the master of the universe. So when we would have our problems, Justin will tell you the story. We had a staircase that came down into our kitchen from upstairs where the boys' bedrooms were. And it would look at this big kitchen table. And if there had been a problem and we were going to be dealing with it the next morning, Justin would tell you, I always knew when I came down the stairs, there would be Dad sitting in the chair with the Bible open. And I would walk over and he would look at me and he would say, I feel really bad. I mean, this thing that happened for you has put you at odds with the maker of everything. and here's what the maker says about what you did. How can I help you get right with him?
Fascinating.
And Justin said that had a huge mark on the way he just kind of thought about things. So, I mean, those two things kind of stand out for me.
Yes, what I love about that is it's not positioning kind of like you against your child. It's like, hey, let me help you, child. You're at odds. So you're kind of taking their side in a way, as opposed
I'm on
to,
their team.
No, Dad, yeah, you're on their team, as opposed to, no, Dad, you shouldn't have done that. Now I need to correct you. I really like that. Yeah, that's very helpful. Okay, I need to get a few more questions in here, so I'm going to have to pick and choose.
I hope this is worthwhile for you.
It's very worthwhile. Trust me. This is wonderful. Thank you again. But Justin said that you have spent a large time overseas, potentially having spent time in over 100 countries.
Yeah, I think he's exaggerating.
Well, if it's not 100,
the people that worked for me were in over 100 countries. I've probably been in 25 or 30, maybe.
Okay,
something like that.
So I'm curious then. I'm curious what your thoughts are on travel. Did you see benefits there? Now, of course, that travel is work related, but did you travel outside of work? Were you intentional to travel with your boys and show them the world? What are your thoughts on international travel as it relates to the development of a child?
We did mission trips, those kinds of things, for a week, 10 days, that kind of thing. Patty even more so than I did with the boys. From a point of them traveling, vacations were our only point of travel. And for the most part, it stayed within the confines of the U.S., maybe the Caribbean or Hawaii, that kind of thing, but mostly within the U.S. So it was more the mission trips that would get them outside. And then college, I think I'm reminded of Justin spending time at The Hague and throughout Europe as part of his training in college, coursework in college. So, I mean, they're exposed. Wayne, when he graduated from high school, my oldest, one of his closest friends had a grandmother who had a ministry in Uganda to widows. It was called the Widow's Mite. And she had been there for 20 or 30 years. And he and that his friend went to Uganda right after graduating high school for the summer, basically, and they lived in the jungle. So they've all done this. Brandon, my middle son Brandon, he's the middle child. He went on an Eastern European missions trip in the midst of the Bosnia conflicts. And, I still remember Patty and I, he sends us a picture, via his phone from where him and the supposed adult he's with, and they're standing in the middle of a riot.
Oh my
I'm like, perfect. And there's like artillery in the background. And
what could go wrong?
This is great, So, the boys have all travel. Now, as it relates to our business, all the Justin and Wayne particularly have done a bunch of Middle East travel because of our work there with the military.
Yeah, and I mean, I just assume that with the travel that you've done, well, let me ask it as a question rather than an assumption. With the travel you've done, did you find yourself sort of thinking differently about the world than you had maybe in certain areas before you had traveled that extensively?
There's always surprises. I'm kind of like a natural learner. I love history, and so I was always intrigued by it. Never really nervous, about it in that regard. I guess I'd make a couple of observations. One, it's not the United States. Doesn't matter where you go, whether it's Western Europe or Asia or the Middle, it's just not the United States. And there was, I don't know how to describe the feeling I had. But when I would get through customs to depart to come back to the U.S., and I'd sit on the U.S. carrier to fly back to as soon as I sat down in the seat, I went, I'm home.
Mm-hmm.
It was just it was weird,
Yeah.
in that regard. When people say that God has blessed the United States and it is the greatest country in the world, it is. If you've traveled the world, you know it is. The people in the rest of the world know it is. We don't. We're so busy fighting with each other, we don't, get to see that. A couple of surprises for me, just anecdotal comments. I spent a decent amount of time in China, and that was, it's different now. It was while it was still, kind of developing, and I expected for that to be a more difficult place than it was. It's kind of almost an oxymoron. The society is so controlled. The idea of crime and you being in danger doesn't really come across, and that surprised me. I expected to feel more of that communist darkness, oppressiveness, and a legal system that had things all out of control. And it was just the opposite because it was so controlled. It was so militarily controlled. That's one that, kind of stands out for me. Europe, amazing history. It just is shocking, the absence of the church and Christianity, as a whole. It's just shocking.
It's noticeable.
Yeah, it's shocking.
It's interesting you say that, because I just was having cigars with someone last night, and he's looking at potentially moving into a program, a pastoral type thing for 2 years over there. And he was just saying that there's no churches. Mm-mm. And of the churches, the ones that are kind of open up the scripture and preach from it diligently, that's a small percentage of the total amount of church. And just
it is,
to your point, there's very few Bible faithful churches there.
And that's what frightens me about the United States right now. We could talk about politics all day, but set that aside and just think about what's going on culturally relative to the Christian faith and just the church as a whole. Without God's intervention, we're going to look more like Europe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, let me close with this question. If you think back on, the question is, if you were to give your 30-year-old self some advice, what advice might that be? So 30, I believe you said you're at McDonald's, kind of on the beginning of this career trajectory. I believe you said you had 3 boys already. So if you were to think back on in that stage in life and you were to give yourself some advice at that stage, what would that be?
I'm not a second guesser, so there's probably not much I would say I'd do different, because I just don't think that's healthy. Because there's always 100,000 things you could in a moment, think you'd do different. But then in the reality of that moment, you did the best you could at the time with what you had. So I think walking around with guilt is not a good thing. Mm-hmm. And I think there's way too much dialogue about those kinds of things, for my taste anyway. As a 30-year-old, it's better for me to paint a picture of who I was then. I had just come to faith. I didn't have anybody as a mentor or a coach about things of the faith. And I was trying to figure it out. If I would have been able to find that person, to let them invest their experience and their life in me right then, that would have, I think it would have accelerated things for me. And yet, in my personal experience, God knew that. He moved me from Pittsburgh to Chicago and planted us in a church that was all about that. So within 2 or 3 years, that was in place, but it wasn't my plan. It just kind of happened. But You know, and the thing about me, I've always had older friends. I've always valued someone that's, you know, walked the path before me. I mean, the best man at my wedding was 15 years older than I was.
Okay.
I've always been wired that way. And yet, you caused me to think back when I came to faith, there was nobody there like waiting for me, like saying, let me put my arm around you and, you know, take you down the road with me.
Yeah.
Wow. We need that
today
in the church.
Yeah, we really do. You're totally right about that. And oftentimes, don't you think the older, wiser men, in our case, will just say they're willing, but they don't always want to assume that the younger guy is looking for their help.
Yeah, you got to ask me. If you don't ask me, I'm not going to do it.
Yeah. And the younger guy doesn't want to be a bother, so I feel like sometimes there's that disconnect when both parties are willing. They're just, someone needs to make the first move.
I have 4 guys that I meet with on Friday mornings that I handpicked, separate from teaching Bible studies to men. And one of them's 40, but the other 3 are 30. One of them's probably 28. And one of the things that amazes me is the guy that's 40 has the same reaction that the 3 younger guys do. And that is, no one's ever asked me to do this before. And I've always wanted something like this. And I think so. What you're saying is ringing true. I hear it.
Yes. Yep. Well, Wayne, thank you for your time.
Yeah, glad
really
you did,
appreciate
man.
that. Thanks for being on the podcast.
Hope it's helpful, bud.
I'm sure it will be.